Why choose Zbigniew Brzezinski? Why in this moment write about that person?
I was given tons of primary material, including the diaries he kept as national security advisor, where he would sort of speak paragraphs into his dictaphone every night, going home from the White House. I think his life was mostly dominated by the Cold War. And so when the Cold War ended, at a time when everyone else, or most other people, were triumphalist about the victory of the West, and particularly of America, Brzezinski began warning that the rot now from within was America's major challenge. And he accused Americans of hubris and of not understanding how quickly they could alienate Russia, Iran, China, and fellow travelers. And that was quite prescient. And in fact, why the subtitle of my book is America's Great Power Prophet. He had a very good predictive record.
So, Ed, there's any number of American grandees in the foreign policy space that you could have written about when you decided to write this wonderful but not tiny book. And you could have spent that amount of time, and I know all of the years of hard work that you've spent working on it because I've watched you work on it. Was there something you learned writing it, Ed, and researching it, this story of this immigrant family that came from Poland shortly before the Second World War, moved to Canada as diplomats, and then, of course, Poland gets overtaken, and then comes finally to the United States and becomes a national security advisor to Jimmy Carter. Was there something that you learned about him that made you think, okay, this man in 2025 seems relevant?
With a biography, you really need to get into the early formative years. You need to get into the sort of crucible where that character was made. And for Brzezinski, clearly it was sort of interwar Poland, ending in this horrible conflagration where the Nazis and the Soviets, divide the country and then raise it, essentially. That was burned into Brzezinski's sort of early character formation. And he brought that with him across the Atlantic and into Harvard and then New York and then to Washington eventually. And it's not in odd ways not dissimilar to Henry Kissinger, who's a Jewish extended family, mostly died in the Holocaust, and he left coincidentally Europe in the same year as Brzezinski, 1938. They both crossed the Atlantic on the eve of the Second World War, and I think in both cases, but in very different ways, this shaped how they viewed the world, but one very similar way, which is that civilization, society is inherently fragile. It's inherently unstable. And I think that is something that both men, although they disagreed on so much, agreed on about America, is that America in its sort of purest exceptionalist form, somehow sees itself as standing apart from history and not subject to its tragic laws. And I think in 2025, with us living through what some people call the revenge of geopolitics that's going on around the world, it's very, very good for Americans to be reminded of the importance of understanding the value of what we have and what we could be losing. A little bit like good health. You only rate it when you lose it.
As I went through the book over the weekend, and you keep coming across these issues around the world that America is still dealing with, right? We're still dealing with the aggrieved power of Russia. And Brzezinski very famously pointed out that, without Ukraine, if Ukraine was subordinate to Russia, then Russia would become an empire again. He was, as you say, incredibly prescient. But you read through the book and you go, okay, so there's Russia, there's the problems with Europe, there's the Middle East that he was dealing with, of course, the Iran hostage deal or the Iran hostage case. And it's the same, and China, and it's the same issues that American foreign policy experts have to deal with today, most of which have not been resolved. And I wonder if there's anything in Brzezinski that would look at where we are today and say, for all the work we put into it, yes, okay, so the Soviet Union ended, but we're still dealing with the same stuff around the world and the same problems around the world. And maybe we didn't get it right. It's just so striking reading your book, Ed, how much of, past is prologue, past is present.
Yes, it's not even dead. It's not even past, as the
It's not
Starron
even
quote.
past.
I did a lot of interviews with Henry Kissinger for this book, with many people, more than 100 people. But Kissinger was very available, and he said, "Look, I think what we don't understand so well in America is history never stops. It goes on and on and on. So I think, if you look at how they both dealt with China, bringing China more into the American camp, breaking it away from the Soviets in the 70s. This was a brilliant strategic chessboard move in the Cold War context, and it helped weaken the Soviet Union and lead to the West victory in the Cold War. But of course, it also seeded the rise of China, which is now a problem that America is indefinitely going to have to grapple with. Another is the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. A perfectly sensible, although controversial, decision by Brzezinski to fund the Mujahideen rebellion against the Soviets, which, of course, was designed to weaken the Soviets, which it did. It helped contribute to the demise of the Soviet Union, the war in Afghanistan. But that then creates problems down the line of Islamism, or worldwide terrorism. I think, the idea that there is ever a foreign policy solution, short of sort of utopian thinking, is something both of these figures would have resisted. But no, history does go on, and it does require, solutions that will last for the short and medium term. But there is never a permanent solution to anything, and I think that's sort of that's sort of little bit of grit of pessimism at the heart of these strategic thinkers is something quite valuable, because it schools us to realize you have to deal with what's in front of you, and if you aim it to an unrealistic height, you're going to fall flat on your face.
Are there any of those kind of thinkers today? Are there any of those big strategic thinkers?
It's a really good question. Look, I think America is full of the sort of most extraordinary scholarship of all regions of the world. But you don't see any scholar who's able to become a scholar practitioner in the way that those two were, or George Kennan. I don't wish to confine it just to Kissinger and Brzezinski. It's not because they're not there. I think it's because the demand for them has decreased. I think foreign policy has become much, much more political. It's become domestic politics, foreign policy. The division between politics doesn't stop at the water's edge, as people used to say.
Brzezinski himself wasn't particularly complimentary in his later years about America's either foreign policy strategies or strategy. He felt that America lacked a kind of grand overarching strategy. Or maybe it was easier in the Cold War. I mean, you had, the good guys versus the bad guys, and it was pretty simple, and it was a pretty simple message to sell around the country as well. But actually, I wonder, you look at the Trump administration now, and whatever you might say about the tactics and the implementation, Trump has a grand vision for America, doesn't he?
I think it's a grand series of impulses. I don't think it has a real strategy behind it. And the sort of core of the Trump vision is essentially we live in a jungle, and big predators are more powerful than small predators. And Trump sees, the Western Hemisphere. This is America's backyard, and therefore we can do what we like, even to Canada, even to friends. And Ukraine is Russia's backyard, and Taiwan, I think, by implication, is China's. I don't think Brzezinski would have agreed. Well, I know he disagreed with that, and would probably be looking to not form an alliance with Russia at all, but to stoke Russian paranoia about China, just to keep them a little bit suspicious of each other so that they don't unite in this alliance of the aggrieved. Russian fears that China wants the territory back that the Tsars seized from it in the 19th century. The fact that Russia is probably going to be the biggest beneficiary of climate change. And you'll see the Siberian tundra unfreezing and becoming agricultural. And China has acute population pressures. There's a lot of material to play with there if you want to be Machiavellian and to prize Russia and China apart. I think he'd be looking, and probably Kissinger would too, at that kind of strategy. I think Trump's policies are pushing Russia and China closer together, which again, just in terms of chessboard, logic, it's not smart to unite your enemies. Try and keep them divided. Try and stoke mutual suspicion.
If Marco Rubio, who I suppose is our new national security advisor, were deciding to pick up your book this weekend and read it, Ed, and who knows, maybe he will. Maybe you've sent him a copy. What would you like Secretary Rubio most to take away from it, from the life of Brzezinski?
It's very difficult to give him good advice because being a successful national security advisor and strategist means having the confidence of your president to give you enough leeway and latitude to really conduct longer term strategic moves.
Well, and also the confidence to be able to disagree with your president quite often, quite publicly.
Yes, and I think Mike Waltz, who's just been promoted, quotation marks, to the United Nations, but basically got rid of as Trump's first national security advisor, he made the mistake of disagreeing with Trump. He has to find other ways to work Trump, and unfortunately that does involve flattery and not disagreeing with him.
Okay. Ed Luce, thank you very much.
A huge pleasure. Thank you, Katty.